Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of the people who are participating from a number of time zones, I'm sure. Welcome to this Includivate webinar, which is going to reflect on some research emerging from Harvard Business Review and McKinsey and the World Economic Forum in respect of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and whether they are actually having the desired effect. My name is Wendy Orr. I have been working in the DEI space for 24 years across a wide range of sectors. I have to say my focus more recently has been the corporate sector, and I'm currently a freelance consultant working largely with corporates in South Africa. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be joined by two equally passionate DEI practitioners, Sisay Mamo and Suchi Rajendra. Sisay is a passionate disability rights advocate. As a person with a visual impairment, he has first-hand experience of living with a disability. He has dedicated his career to helping others with a disability to see their potential through teaching, policy advocacy, and collaboration. Sisay is a teacher who has worked in education for many years before moving into the social development sector, and he's currently the lead for disability inclusion for the Tear Fund Ethiopia office, and he's also a member of Includivate board. Sisay, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Wendy.
Suchi is a global HR leader and entrepreneur with over 30 years of corporate experience with a number of organizations, including Colt Tech Services and PepsiCo, working across Asia, Europe, and Australia. She's currently the CEO of QED HR, a boutique HR consultancy firm which she founded. She advises companies on their DEI strategies, and she also mentors and coaches women leaders. She's a well-known speaker in the areas of leadership, diversity, inclusion, and HR strategy. Welcome, Suchi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wendy, for the warm welcome.
If I can just say to our participants, if you have questions or comments, please pop them in the chat. We'll try to leave some time at the end for questions, and then we'll be able to engage with you. But we have quite a lot to get through, so I'm not making any promises. As I said, we want to start with the conversation by reflecting on some research that has been done by various organizations, looking at the efficacy of various DEI interventions and whether they are in fact meeting the needs of employees. Both of these charts that I show you come from corporate research, and we'll take some time to reflect on those. Swapnil, can we see the first slide, please? Okay, can we go back to the first chart? Okay, so this is from the Harvard Business Review, and essentially what the research looked at was the view of chief HR officers or people and culture officers or human capital officers in corporates on how employees were experiencing various DEI strategies and interventions, and then how employees themselves were feeling about those interventions. So on this graph, the gold bar is the HR leaders results, and this is HR leaders who strongly agree that the need is being addressed for employees. And then the dark blue graph is employees that strongly agree that the need is being addressed for them personally. I'm not going to go through item by item, but I think it's very clear from this graph that what HR officers think is landing well is very different to what employees are experiencing at the coalface, as it were. So there's a very clear disconnect between the sort of formal organizational view, but what employees, well, you know, what the lived experience is of employees on a day-to-day basis. I have to say the one figure which really worries me is that only 30% of HR officers believe that employees are experiencing fair treatment, which I think is a little bit shocking. And that's the one area where employees actually agreed with them. But as I say, the takeout message is vastly different views depending on which side of the corporate divide you are sitting. Next slide, please. This is from McKinsey research. Sorry, we've gone back instead of forwards. Okay, this is McKinsey research where they asked women in corporates what they thought the barriers to their success and advancement were, and then asked organizational representatives what they thought the barriers to the success and advancement of women are. And what I find interesting is that the organizational representatives tend to externalize the issue. So public policies or services are not conducive to women in the workplace. So, you know, a corporate could say, what can we do about public policies? Cultural or social expectations that women will not work. Again, the corporate will say, what can we do about cultural or social expectations? But in fact, what women find the most problematic is attitudes towards women in the workplace. And that's something where corporates can very effectively intervene. But they are seeing, as I say, other more external issues as the barriers to women advancing in the workplace. So you can take the slides down now. Thanks, Swapnil. So Suchi, share with us what your takeouts from those graphs are. Do you think that there is a big disconnect between what employers think are working and what employees themselves are experiencing?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. I mean, the survey was quite revealing, actually, because over the past few years, the companies have really thrown, you know, the sink and the whatever the bath water they call on this issue of D&I, and especially the big major corporates, you know. So it's interesting to see from the perspective of the employees who don't feel as much, that they've not felt the impact of it. And I you know, little digression here, a little story. So, you know, the manager, for example, you may come into a company and the manager is really sweet and calm and everything. And then on the day of a board meeting, he yells at you. Now, when you have to report back, you will always remember that moment of truth. You will always remember that he was not calm, and you will give that feedback to him that, no, my manager is not a calm person. The manager will say, but I was calm 364 days of the year, and I was not calm on one day. But that is what stays with you. And I think it's the same thing of D&I. You can do everything, you know, but if you don't change the core way that managers, organizations, policies, processes work, that every moment of truth has to work towards that inclusive environment, that feeling of fairness, feeling of belonging. If you digress even for a second, if you let the ball drop even for the second, that's what the employees remember, fairly so and rightly so, because that's what you take back, you know, that little comment, that little work in the eyes when the person is not considered for the promotion, or the person is looked over because of certain assumptions and biases. And employees very quickly feel that. You cannot gloss over it and say, oh, but our policies are very fair. They're not, because you denied me the promotion basis your bias, I was pregnant, or basis the bias that I couldn't travel, or base whatever it is. That's what people remember. So I think there is a lot more to be done. We cannot say, oh, we've done all of this and therefore there's nothing more to be done. I think it's a 360-degree effort. It's a holistic effort. It has to be done all the time, more sensitization. And, you know, the new generation expects so much more. It expects so much more. You can't rest on your laurels and say, this is what we've done. They'll say, but that's table stakes. You know, we won't even consider that. So Qantas just announced their change in uniform policy and all. And the new generation is like, really? That's what you're doing? So you can't say, oh, we're doing this and feel very good, because very quickly it becomes norm and even less than norm. So that's my take, if that helps. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, what you were saying actually reminds me of that Maya Angelou quote, which goes something like, people will forget what you said, will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you make them feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your lived experiences is about how you feel every day, and that's what people will reflect on. Sise, sorry, share with us your sense about what's happening in the development and humanitarian sector in respect of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and whether you think the kinds of interventions that organizations are putting in place are actually speaking to employee needs.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. I think more or less similar results could be found out if researched in the area of humanity and development organizations in relation to diversity and inclusion. Because at policy level, here, I mean, in development organizations also states that they are highly committed to promote diversity and inclusion. In some cases, even they have departments of diversity and inclusion, but what employees feel about it is quite different as far as I know. This is maybe just to add on Suchi's point from another perspective. This could be related to the dynamic nature of diversity and inclusion itself. Because when you talk about diversity and inclusion, even if you put something, I am committed to promote diversity and inclusion at policy level, diversity by itself is diverse. Like, you will talk about women, maybe pregnant women, lactate mothers, people with disabilities, maybe LGBTs, maybe minority ethnic groups, color minor, different kind of. So different group of people need different kind of intervention. As HR, maybe the HR person may be committed wholeheartedly to promote diversity and inclusion. At least he or she may have a disposition, a belief, but he or she may not know the exact way to address how to treat specific disability, or I mean specific diversity. Sorry, I'm disability biased. I always say to Christy that I am blind biased, but now I'm disability biased a bit. Sorry. So look, even in my bias, you see, when I myself, for example, if I am the head of HR, I might talk much about diversity, but still much talk about disability rather than just forgetting other segments of diversity. That's one challenge, I think, the dynamic nature of diversity. Second, the desire to achieve on the side of the desire to just to have an achievement sense. But as Suchi rightly put it, if you make a slight mistake, that will affect identity, because some of the diversity issues are identity issues. Therefore, the slight mistake might result in a total devastation or a total attack on the identity of the person. So the response, the reaction from the employee would be then very high. So regarding my suggestions of the intervention, well, I would always say nothing about us without us. So it's very good to always consult, to engage the people, the diverse people as employees, to work with employer in setting up the system. And it's always good to make sure that to have a twin track or maybe a triple track, whatever approach, instead of simply putting a commitment, a general commitment that we will do this or that. It's very, very good to have that kind of approach to consider, like to specifically consider people, and always very, very good to consult with the employee himself or herself. I think for the sake of time, let me stop here.
Well, in fact, you've already started answering my second question. Thanks, Sise. Which is, what should we do to properly understand how employees are experiencing DEI efforts and interventions? And I think that perhaps we need to understand the needs of employees first before we even start with our DEI interventions. Suchi, what's your view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think listening. I think the three words have to be repeated over and over again, and there's nothing, because things change. People try, even in their life stages, people change. And at different life stages, you need different things from the organization. And generations change. So as new people enter the organization, things change. The environment changes. So there are so many changes. You can't say, oh, I did this survey 2 years ago or even a year ago, and that's all that I'm doing. No, it is, in fact, continuous listening. And in a way, today you have to actually make personas. You have to create almost 20, 30 personas of the organization and say, okay, here is the persona of a person working in the sales front. What does that kind of person need? And who are these people here? They're women in the sales, or they're men in the sales, they're young mothers, older people with older parents. So all that. Then there are manufacturing, depending on your organization, depending on the environment, the socio-economic, political environment that your organization is, you have to create that opportunity for everybody to feel that they can voice, and the voice is going to be heard, and heard really deeply, with sympathy, with empathy, and accepted and acknowledged without judgment, compassionate listening. That's the first. I think if people get that sense that this really organization is really there for me, it cares for my voice, a lot will happen even before you think it needs to happen, because people will feel that they're being engaged and they're being heard. I think that's the first step.
And so a couple of things that I'm taking away from this conversation. First of all, is the complexity and the dynamic nature of diversity, which requires organizations to respond in an equally dynamic way. And sometimes organizations are anything but dynamic, but nevertheless. And I mean, one of the things I was going to ask is, whether a once a year employee engagement survey is adequate. I don't think it is. And organizations need to have a much more agile listening strategy than, answer 100 questions once a year, and we'll use that to guide our efforts, in perpetuity almost. I also really like what you say about human attention. I think in this world of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and social media, really human engagement and listening is starting to become quite a scarce commodity, sadly. Okay, let's put up our first poll. So people who are with us in the webinar, we're going to ask you a question, which is, what do you think is the most significant challenge to progress on DEIB, that's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, in organizations? Lack of leadership buy-in, lack of diversity in the employee complement, especially senior levels. DEIB is seen as an HR responsibility and not a strategic business imperative, and DEIB interventions are once-off events and don't address systemic issues, and then other. So everyone, please vote for one of these options, and let's see where the majority of people think the issues are, or we may get an even spread. So we have 12 votes so far. It's going up, 13. All right. Give it 10 more seconds. Speak now or forever hold your peace on this particular topic. Okay, let's end the poll. And we have got an even spread, a very even spread. 31% of participants say lack of leadership buy-in, 31% that DEIB is seen as an HR responsibility, and 31% that DEIB interventions are once off. Suchi, what's your view on those results?
I really do think all three are such important pillars. And it's great to see, the crowd has sourcing or crowd answers come up with the three very important aspects of it. Because very often I see, and I'm sure you also in South Africa must be seeing this is very often in Asia and India, this whole, one day, Women's Day, and then that month, a lot of activity starts happening, or the Pride Month, and again, a lot of disability, that it's good because it brings awareness, but I think some companies are very comfortable in stopping there, which is not what needs to happen. It has to be, like I said, it has to be the everyday, every moment kind of thing that needs to happen. Again, I've seen it as HR head, CHRO, saying, oh, what are you doing about DEIB? And I'm like, no, this is we are doing, not me. But very easily managers, leaders tend to put it or something that you guys need to be thinking about, and not us as an organization, because the culture is not really the owner of HR sitting somewhere. It is the everyday manager intervention and interaction with his team or her team or their team. And definitely, I think leaders think, obviously they will think business first, but they need to also know that this impacts, and more research, more and more studies say this all the time, that if your people are not engaged, if they come to work and feel troubled or feel not heard, their productivity is much lower, the engagement is much lower, the passion is much lower. You will never harness the energy of your passionate team that you have. You've got 100 people, but you're taking the energy only of 60 people, let's say. So you're actually not doing a good business. You're not being a good leader. You're not inspirational. And I would leave it at that. So I completely agree with it. And I think there has to be a lot of work done in each of the pillars, and even the senior level, because, coming up in 30 years ago, I saw very few women role models. And therefore I thought, oh, if I have to succeed, I have to be like a man. And that kind of made me feel, oh, if I have a baby, it's wrong. If I have, I was guilty asking for leave, asking for time off. I was feeling all the time I was made to feel guilty, till slowly I said, I am now the senior leader. It's my duty now to change the conversation. And so even that is very important, and of course now it's more than women, but how many do we see even today? Very few, very few, at least in India, very sad, very few.
Yeah. I mean, South Africa actually has a pretty good record in terms of representation of women, but even so, probably only about a third of C-suite executives are women. So I'm afraid there's a long way to go, no matter what country you're in. Let's bring up the third slide, please, Swapnil. I just want to quickly speak to this report, and then we'll have another poll. And so I'm going to ask you next time to comment on the results. Okay, the next slide. Next one. No, this one. Sorry, my fault. The World Economic Forum, in partnership with McKinsey, on behalf of the Global Parity Alliance, did research across a number of corporates, trying to identify those critical success factors for DEI in organizations. And they came up with 5 factors which they believe simply have to be in place in order for DEI to make meaningful progress. So the first is a nuanced understanding of the root causes of DEI challenges. And I think here they're really saying, you know, don't go on gut feel, don't go on anecdotal evidence, really try and understand, you know, take a data-driven approach to understanding the root causes. And that's not only quantitative data, it's qualitative data. So listen to what your people are saying. A meaningful definition of success. So really understand what you're trying to achieve. Accountable and invested business leaders, solutions designed for context, and rigorous tracking and course correction. And I think, you know, that may well be the approach to any business problem, but I think we tend not to bring a rigorous business approach to DEI issues. So now we are going to bring up the next poll and ask you, which you think is, I'm not sure what the question is, which is most important, or which one we are not getting right? Oh, which one is your priority? So if you were head of DEIB in a large organization, either corporate or humanitarian development, where would you start with your DEIB work? Okay, the answers are coming in. We've had 16 people so far. Any further input? Okay. So the results we have is 38% of our participants believe that an understanding of the challenges is most important. 25% say a meaningful definition of success, and then 25% accountable and invested leaders. So Sise, what's your view in terms of how one should go about approaching DEIB issues in an organization, and what's your reflection on these results?
I say, can you repeat the third one?
Accountable and invested leaders.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think understanding the roots challenge of the diversity and inclusion is the most important, I believe, because as you have been saying, or as you were quoting from the report, mostly organizations, be it in terms of both humanitarian development organizations, caught up in anecdotal evidences, anecdotal things rather than systemic things. I remember a year or two years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, yeah, Ethiopian Ministry of Education was the minister himself was convinced by one initiative of a certain individual person who brought that initiative to challenge the issue of accessibility for the blind in examinations. Now, the issue was the minister didn't make any assessment, but he was impressed by the initiative, by the individual initiative. And because he has a ministerial power, he tried to implement it, but he couldn't, because there needs to be making an assessment, deep assessment, the nature of to understand. So mostly people caught up like by some anecdotal things and forget that they're handling a big systemic issue. So the diversity issue is a very, very big one when we bring that, because it talks about dynamic people, different, very diverse kind of people. So it's very important to understand the root cause of the challenge. Where are the challenges? What is the data? And I think I would like to add a point here that For example, if we try to mainstream data from the very beginning, into the system in every point, by accommodating as much as possible to diverse points of inclusion, then it will help to solve the problem. Of course, if you understand the system also, the challenge, you will also challenge your definition of success, what success in inclusion means. Otherwise, you will be, for example, if you try to include women and forget other group of people, even in the case of women also, there are different kinds of women, different kinds of challenge. So if you say that, okay, we have achieved diversity and inclusion because I'm able to make 20-30% of my staffs become women, then you are forgetting the definition of success. Obviously, the issue of diversity and inclusion, mostly to a large extent, I would say, is being treated from a welfare perspective rather than from a right-based approach. So that makes organizations not to be accountable. So that's also a very important point. But I would, if you ask me to vote for, I would say understanding the challenge should be the first one. Thank you.
Thanks. Suchi, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, totally. I agree with Sise, and I think many organizations like quick wins. Give me a quick win. So and so therefore, and people get caught up. The DEI also need to showcase what they've done for the year, what they've achieved, and therefore there is a poster child each year that's created, a poster win that's created, and then I've done that to get the big reward and recognition and all of that. And therefore, there is limited scope, I would say, limited system way of seeing those challenges in deep ways and saying, hey, you know what? This cannot be solved in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. This is a multi-year effect, and you will only see the impact after 3 years. Very few organizations like that answer. They're like, no, right now, what can you do to me? What can you give me right now so I can show the public, show my shareholders, show my stakeholders quarter on quarter that this is what I've done. So increasing diversity ratios, doing, making something. So that itself, that behavior for results and impact and quick wins takes away from the need to do that root cause analysis, right? Takes away the need to say, hey, let's really get into the depth of it. Let's really understand what's happening. A quick movie reference, Hidden Figures. If I don't know how many have watched that beautiful movie of the 3 Black women in NASA. And she says that, I can't go to the toilet. And here's a leader who's very invested, who's very thing. And what does he do? He just goes and breaks the room, the colored and non-colored. He said, now no more restrooms for colored non. That's, again, he's done the quick solution. But there is so much that lady said, and he did something. But was that enough to systemically change how everyone felt a sense of belonging in that culture, in that era, So that's what comes up to me right now as Sise was talking.
I mean, certainly from, I think we've all been in this space for a number of years, and it absolutely is, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to have a quick run for 10 seconds and get the gold medal and everything's fantastic. And I think people do get impatient. They want immediate results. But Sise, that comment that you made about DEI not being sort of a welfare initiative, I think is so important. Some organizations tend to think that, this shows how nice we are to our employees if we pay some attention to this stuff. And it's a nice to have, but it's not a business imperative. And as long as that is the view, then when times get tough and budgets are tight, well, then, the nice to have, we don't need to have anymore. One more comment from my side as well, and I guess this is anecdotal, is so often in organizations where I've worked, when there is an issue of, not enough women in senior positions, The answer is a leadership development program. You know, let's send the women on a leadership development program, because there's obviously something wrong with them. They need to be developed. You know, regardless of what the actual issue is. What I want to see is a men's leadership development program so that they are in a better position to lead diverse teams.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to sort of change track a little bit now. All the research that we've looked at this afternoon comes from the global north. Harvard, McKinsey. I mean, I suppose the World Economic Forum is you know, not only a global north body, but most of the corporates that they included in their research were from the global north. And so we're now going to have a poll with a very simple yes, no, don't know answer. And the question is it appropriate and effective to lift and drop global north DEI practices into the global south context? Yes, no, don't know. Okay, the no's are winning. Any further input? Okay, let's close it. Well, I'm not surprised. Overwhelmingly, the 92% of our participants say that they do not think it is appropriate. And perhaps before I hand over to our panelists to comment, I don't want to imply that there is not learning to be gained from what is happening in the global north. My anxiety is that the learning at the moment is, you know, going one way. And that they're certainly from the point of view of South Africa, the kind of North American or European way of approaching diversity simply does not begin to understand our context. But Sisay, let me start with you. Do you think we can lift and drop global North solutions into the global South?
Not really. I mean, we should learn a lot from the global North experience, but we shouldn't totally replicate it without adapting it into our, because I'm from the global South anyway, into our context. I can raise lots of, in fact, partly one of the failures of the approach of the implementation of the diversity and inclusion in the global South is the fact that people are trying to bring the solution of the global North without digesting, without localizing it into the context of the South. So in that case, it becomes too expensive and too what we call strange to be implemented in the context of the South. Too expensive and too strange. Why I say too expensive? Because some solutions are designed based on the capability, the implementing capability of the global North. So when they come to the South, they may not work out in that case. But I believe that we can use the analogy of a mother to see how diversity and inclusion can work at any context. Like any mother, whether she's poor or rich, whether she's advanced, whether she's from the global North or the global South, whatever, she can nurture her children equally and sometimes even nurture more to support her disadvantaged child through what we policymakers call affirmative action. The mother may not know, the uneducated mother may not know what affirmative action means. So she will tell her that in her own capacity. But when it comes to governments, when it comes to business issues, when it comes to development and NGOs, they try to dump the solution proposed somewhere else without learning from it, without adapting it, into the south, and it becomes a one event case because it's expensive. It cannot go more than that because it's not planned, it's not designed in accordance with the local implementation capacity. On the other side, it will be also too strange in terms of culture. Even if we talk about diversity and inclusion, still we shouldn't forget the power of a culture. So we should consider diversity and inclusion within culture. Otherwise, it will be repulsive, and it will be even counter. It will be even more destructive because it might. When you try to bring something against your culture in the name of diversity and inclusion, it might totally work against the initiative. So it's, as you said, it's a marathon. It's a gradual process. So it's very, very good to consider the issue of culture also, because everything came out. We cannot think of like this modernity some 100, 200 years ago, but the world lived for more than 1,000, 2,000 years. And it's by receiving what, we received Aristotle, we received Plato, but I'm quite sure Plato and Aristotle are not the same with our culture, with the time of this era. So it's very good to go also with culture. I hope I didn't complicate things.
No, thank you. Thank you for that very thoughtful and thought-provoking input. Suchi, what's your view?
Yeah, when I saw the answer first, it was very intuitive that we'll all say no, we don't drop something. I think the word drop means just landing it without context, without anything. But I just want to be a devil's advocate here and say there are a lot of research that is funded in the North. That North means the West, right? There's a lot of research that is funded there, and there is a lot of findings, learnings that helps in the East also looking at it openly, because a place like India has been being colonized and accepting the lot of 200, 300, 400 years of different cultural impositions. I think somewhere we don't know what our culture is, right? And therefore we are stuck to some laws that the British left, and they have changed, but we are still following those laws. And then there are remnants of earlier culture. So I think we have to be present to the here and now. And as a woman, I think we have to be present to the modern woman, right? Whether it's North or East or West, it has to be present to the modern generation. And therefore, people in India, the generation in India are seeing the West. The women in the West are able to do a lot more. So the question is, why can't we? And therefore, the family run. In fact, in India, the sad part is more family run, more traditional companies are very undiverse. They're very uninclusive. They still feel, oh, the wives need to work. They need to be good mothers. They need to be good daughters, as if it's a either or, So I would say it's the MNCs, it's the global companies that have really brought good practices, best practices into India. And I would say that is what has made women in India much more confident and much more willing to go out there when they see other companies. And therefore, when Indian companies say, hey, if I want to compete with global companies, and this is one lever where I am not tapping into 50% of the talent that is available to me because I'm restricting. I'm only looking at 50%. And once they open that up, they say, hey, we get much better talent when we open ourselves up to all kinds of talent, all belonging, caste, creed, language, gender. When we open it up, we get better talent. And that wouldn't have happened if the West had not done so much research and so much learning, saying your decision-making is better when you have a diverse workforce. Your people can have more engagement if you build a fair, inclusive, equity organization. they wouldn't have, because they're very happy to be this male patriarchal traditional society which says, all of you. I mean, I have had girls, my team members come to me and say, ma'am, the person in the factory head is saying I'm not a good person because I choose to work, and his wife is a good person because she chooses to stay. And I said, go back and tell that person off. But that's where they come from. So we have to change that, and to change that, wherever we get the best practice from, I say bring it on, and let's get people empowered with a voice and listen to them and say, what is it that will make sense for you, and do it, versus saying, hey, this is a practice from the north, west, east, wherever. I really don't really care. I say, I want to hear everything that's happening. I want to take the best practices, and I want to implement the best practices for my company, for my country, for my society.
So there's certainly a lot that we can learn, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I suppose I would just love to see, a Harvard Business Review report that focuses on solutions that are being developed and implemented in Africa or India, so that there is two-way learning. But, I fully agree with you. I think, particularly the large global multinationals are doing some really, really excellent work in the DEIB space. I'm not sure if I'm seeing the chat or not, because my chat is empty. So I don't know, Swapnil, are there any questions? Does anyone in the virtual room want to put your hand up and pose a question? Yes, no? Swapnil, is there anything in the chat? I'm not sure I'm looking in the right place. Any hands?
So there's one question, Wendy, from Christy. She's saying, what is the best practice all three of you have seen in your countries?
Whoa, it's really hard to choose just one. Let me reflect on one, which, and it's not a practice, but which probably brings together everything that we've been talking about. And that is what's called a 10-step process, which, it's not just a once-off intervention and then you exit. It probably takes about 2 or 3 years to implement it across the organization, but it really moves in a very systematic way from data analysis, understanding the problem, getting leadership buy-in, engaging leaders about the concept of inclusive leadership, what it involves, what the competencies are, and then taking leaders followed by employees through a number of what we call diversity, equity, and inclusion experiences, where we explore different facets of diversity, whether it's race or gender, sexual orientation, and so on. And based on all the input gathered in those experiences, a plan is then developed to address the issues that are, most pressing, or the biggest pain points, as we call them, and then to ensure that there's monitoring and evaluation, and then you kind of iterate and reiterate. So I guess what I'm saying is there's no single best practice that I know of. I think one's interventions need to be individual, so with the individuals, with teams, but then also systemic and organizational, in order to be able to start making progress. That was a very long answer. Suchi.
Yeah, so I was just thinking as you're speaking, also reflecting on what you're saying. I think for us, I think in India, one of the biggest things that we've seen is really celebrating the girl child, and the government also helping in educating the girl child. That has really made a difference, because now we see a lot of the STEM institutes or courses being taken by girls. And therefore, when you go to large tech companies, So there's so much job opportunities and girls being encouraged, because those are jobs which are office-based, one city-based, a good work environment. So parents are also very happy to see their girls go into these safe zones. And those companies are also talking about how to make their company safe, how to also transport the women back and forth from their homes, so they don't even have to use the public transport. So that has, it's interesting that something somewhere then changes, it has a ripple effect. And that ripple effect has meant that a substantial jump in the working women in STEM, which is very unlike other countries, other places. So that's really motivating. And when people talk about their daughters in such high pride, I think over a period of a few more years, there will be a substantial difference. And I think I won't name it to one organization or this thing. I'll just say as a systemic change in education has made a difference.
So that's been a real collaborative effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sise, do you have one or two examples of best practice in the DEI space, perhaps particularly in the development humanitarian sector?
Difficult to say, because to begin with, in Ethiopia, diversity and inclusion is not treated as one packaged concept, if you like. I mean, say NGOs or development may focus either on gender, sometimes they may focus either on disability, so on and so forth. So I don't think I have seen organizations that try to engage in full and comprehensive approach of diversity and inclusion. Well, I do not mean that there are organizations, for example, including Include, for example. I mean, our firm, for example, in Ethiopia, when we began this work, we tried to promote that through gender and disability. Yeah, but it's really very hard for me to bring example. But I think there are also other questions being forwarded. Maybe let me try to deal with one of the other questions, which is forwarded by Peter Nash, if you allow me, Wendy.
Sure.
About the transformational, pardon?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, the transformational versus transactional approach of diversity and inclusion. I think this requires maybe further theorizing. As far as I understand, most organizations seem to follow the transactional path rather than transformational path, because what it means, after all, well, sometimes these kind of words are very, very catchy, but also they need proper definition, what it means to apply transformational approach of approach of diversity and inclusion. It requires an answer. So sorry but I couldn't mention any example. It's hard for me to mention examples rather as best practices. Of course, I already mentioned Include case, for example. When we started, we tried to promote disability and gender. I have never seen such a research firm that started its journey like that. Yeah, I would stop here.
Thanks. Perhaps to come to this issue of transactional versus transformational, I think many organizations certainly start in the transactional space. I think there's a sense that there are perhaps quicker wins in a transactional space. You know, you can say we did this, we did that. It's easier to measure. But absolutely, if an organization does not change, you know, we talk about organizational DNA, but if at its heart, an organization does not embrace diversity and inclusion and incorporate it into everything that the organization does, these efforts are unsustainable. They will continuously be, once off training, once off workshop, once off, let's set up a network. I think organizations that are more mature in the DEI space have certainly shifted into the transformational. But you're right, far too many are still in the transactional. I suppose transactional is better than nothing, but one would hope that in due course, DEI wouldn't be seen as this thing that we do when we have time on the side, but becomes absolutely fundamental to who we are as an organization. Suchi, any thoughts from you?
No, I agree with you completely. So don't want to belabor the point. I think a lot of companies, big company, Fortune 500 companies especially, have now got, dedicated D&I strategy head, D&I team, all of that. And they are looking at multi-year efforts. So we shouldn't discount that. But like you said, there are still many who are yet to start the journey. And we hope as more research, more literature comes up, that more will, it will mature over a period of time. It's like HR, it's like everything, right? Starts with, okay, let's just do the needful. And then people become mature and say, no, we need a proper strategy to help us with this.
Okay, thank you so much. We are reaching the end. I'm afraid we can't answer all the questions. Next time we'll try and leave more time for questions. But perhaps just some concluding comments from each of you. Anything in closing, Sise?
Thank you very much. So it's very good. I mean, it's very encouraging that business organizations effort to ensure diversity and inclusion, especially in the global south, in countries like Ethiopia, for example. This is not yet becoming a reality, even if there are some encouraging companies. For example, while Suchi was responding, I thought there is one local NGO called ECDD, for example, which collaborated with business firms to establish what we call Ethiopian Business and Disability Network, still one package of disability. So one of the challenge in diversity and inclusion, as I said at the beginning, is its dynamic nature. Sometimes the disadvantage, some of the diversity elements have their own disadvantage, their own factors. For example, if you take disability is the interaction of different factors. So as a result, it is very hard also to follow a one-side approach, to make companies take measure of including, but also there also needs to work more on the side of people with disabilities themselves to promote their self-esteem, to make them part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Like, it's very easy to point out a problem, but as far as I know, because I learned history as undergraduate, as far as I know, best solution comes always from those who are affected by the problems themselves. For example, Braille, if you take Braille, a blind writing system, it came from a blind person himself. Similar solutions can be mentioned in the case of women, in the case of other diversity groups. So it's very good to have an approach that makes diverse people themselves part of the solution, to make them. I have one motto in one of my projects, which I used to work with older people and people with disabilities. We say, we older people and people with disabilities have a great role to play in the journey of inclusion, like a motto, like a slogan. We used to say that, but it's very important to make them part of the solution rather than simply just respect our rights. No, I think that doesn't take us anywhere unless we become part of the solution. That's my concluding comments.
Thanks. Suchi, last word to you.
Thank you, Wendy. I think this webinar itself is a testament to when research comes out, and good research telling us that there is so much more to be done, and how the impact of what's being done is not the same what that's felt by HR and by employees. It just opens up the lens. And I think these kind of reports are important just to, as third party view of what's happening in the industry. And it just tells us that we need to listen much more. We need to contextualize much more. And we need to, like Sisay said, we need to involve all the stakeholders much more, and not worry that it's not changed overnight. It is a journey. Like you said, it's a marathon, but let's keep some milestones so that we celebrate those wins. We acknowledge, we respect each other, and we respect the work that's being done in this space. I mean, I think at least you and I, Wendy, from the time when we started to today, we've seen the change. We've seen the narrative change. And I really, I'm excited that as our new generations come, they are definitely going to ask, demand, and take small steps. They want giant leaps. And I think that's a great place for us to be, where people are demanding it and no longer being guilty about asking for maternity leave for another extra day. So I think we are going the right way.
Right, all that remains is for me to say thank you so much to our panelists for your input and sharing your wisdom and experience, and thanks to all of our participants. Please follow Includivate on LinkedIn, and look out for our next webinar. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Wendy, for moderating it so well. Thank you so much. Vote of thanks to you, and also to the team behind this, who really put all to the presentations together, the slides together. Thank you, Sisay. Also, I'm just giving you, from the panelists, from me and Sisay, I'm giving the vote of thanks to all of you for coordinating this wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.